If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello, today we have Sonia interviewing John about textual criticism. This is the field of study through which we can know the original text of the New Testament. We are continuing from the previous episode today.
But how can you really prove which was copied from which?
Well, that's actually a very, very good question. And this shows that what Westcott and Hort did was a complete scam. They said what you have to do is build a genealogical tree of the manuscript. They never did that. They never, in their thick book, ever did a genealogical tree of New Testament manuscripts. All they did was hypothetical trees to show that, oh yes, 10 might have been copied from one, which everybody already knows. But they never built a genealogical tree of New Testament manuscripts, and it can't be done. There's simply not enough of them. We have now 5,800 or so of them, but out of the tens of thousands that must have been copied through the centuries, there just is not enough to construct a genealogical tree.
How many would we need to construct a tree then?
It would depend on which ones we had. What scholars have found is that we have 5,800 or so, and almost all of them are considered what they call orphan manuscripts. You can't find among the 5,800 a manuscript from which this one was copied, an actual genetic or genealogical relationship between any two manuscripts. There's a very few. There's a group of 13 called Family 13 that's thought to be genealogically related. There's a group called Family 1, I think about 5 manuscripts there that are thought to be related. And very few others out of the 5,800. There simply are not these genealogical relations. So you can't build a tree because most of the stems, most of the branches are missing. It's like taking a jigsaw puzzle, a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and you've got 4 pieces and trying to tell us, well, what's pictures on the puzzle? It can't be done. And they knew it couldn't be done, and they didn't do it, and nobody's done it. All Westcott and Hort actually did was to raise the theoretical possibility that the majority might. And this is what happens in New Testament scholarship all the time. A scholar raises a theoretical possibility, no evidence, just a theoretical possibility. And once the possibility is raised, the possibility then becomes the fact. And moves from being possible to being probable to being the fact. So then, having established by the genealogical method that the Byzantine text was secondary, which they didn't do, they then tried to give other reasons for getting rid of the Byzantine text. And their main argument was that conflate readings in the Byzantine manuscripts show that the entire text type was indeed secondary and corrupt.
Well, where are conflate readings?
Well, let's look at conflate readings and we'll see that in fact they show the opposite. They show that the Byzantine is the best. What is a conflate reading? Look at Luke 24:53. Read that for us.
And we're continually in the temple praising and blessing God. Amen.
Right, that's from the New King James Version, from the Byzantine text type. The disciples were continually in the temple praising and blessing God. Now read Luke 24:53 from the NIV.
And they stayed continually at the temple praising God.
From the NASB, from the ESV, from the RSV, the HCSB. That's what you're going to see. What's the difference between the two?
Well, all those other versions except the NKJV are missing and blessing.
That's right. Luke 24:53, they're praising and blessing God. But the NIV, the critical text, the Nession, the one based on Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, simply has praising God. So you have to explain, why are they different? How did these differences come about?
Well, I guess maybe a scribe copying just missed and blessing.
Well, that would be one possibility. One possibility is that praising and blessing God is the original reading, and praising God, blessing God arose through accidental omission. One scribe copying praising and blessing God accidentally left out the word blessing and just ended up with praising God. Another scribe might have left out praising and just ended up with blessing God. Now, the other possibility, the one that mainstream textual criticism will tell you, is that praising God is the original reading. That's why you see that in your NIV, your NASB, your ESV, and so on. Then how did you get praising and blessing God? Well, then step 2 is some scribe decided to change praising God to blessing God.
But why?
Well, that's a good question. Why? Would he actually do that? We'll talk about why later. The point is, for this possibility, if you're going to say praising God is the original, you have to explain where blessing God came from, and there's only one place. Some scribe decided to change praising God. So what happens? You've got some manuscripts that says they were in the temple praising God, some manuscripts saying they're in the temple blessing God, and then along comes a Byzantine scribe, and he sees both readings, and he doesn't know which is the original, so he sticks them together. And you end up with praising and blessing God. And that's what they call a conflate reading. He conflated the two different readings he saw, which was an original reading and a secondary reading, and he conflates them, joins them together into what would be then a tertiary reading, I suppose. Now, which of these do you think is the better explanation?
Well, the first one, I don't understand why any scribe would just change praising to blessing. What would even be the motive?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Okay? Remember the rules, the canons of textual criticism? Remember the canon that says that the reading that best explains the origin of others is to be preferred?
Yeah, well, number 1 seems to be the one that best explains the origin of others.
It's always that one. Whenever you have one of these so-called conflate readings, the explanation for the other readings is simple. A scribe accidentally omitted it. You don't have to explain why one of them would take it upon himself to change. The problem with their explanations is it's multi-step. First, you have to explain why a scribe changed one to another before you can even talk about them getting conflated. So that's the problem. When you say that it's obvious they were conflated, really, that's a much more problematic explanation. And if we go to this one, Luke 24:53, and we read Bruce Metzger in his textual commentary on the Greek New Testament, he writes about this: it is undoubtedly a conflation.
Undoubtedly.
Undoubtedly. Why is that undoubtedly? Well, because Sinaiticus and Vaticanus don't have that, so undoubtedly it's a conflation. But if he wants to say that, he has to explain which is the original and how the other one came about, and he can't do it. He goes through discussing, he says, maybe the original scribe wrote blessing, because if you look at the Gospel according to Luke, 12 other times Luke uses this word, and only 3 times does he use the word for praising, okay, which is a nonsense argument. Obviously, Luke knew both words and used both words. These are guys who say that, we can't go by the majority, and he's going by a majority here. And Luke has what, something like 18,000 words in it or so. It's used 12 times, it's only used 3 times. That's no significant difference at all. But he'll say that. But on the other hand, he says, but maybe praising was the original. Because, through time, Christians came to prefer to use the word blessing about God. Pagans liked praising and Christians liked blessing. So eventually some scribe who saw the word praising, they thought, that's how pagans speak, not how Christians speak. So he changed it to blessing. So in the day, Metzger say we don't really know which one. So we'll just go with what we find in Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. The weight of the external evidence, and there you go. That's where it happens. So I ask you, which reading actually best explains the origin of the others?
Praising and blessing.
I would think so. And if this happened, okay, if praising and blessing is the original, and it's much the better explanation, and the others arose by accidental omission, you would think then that most of the manuscripts would have praising and blessing, and small numbers would have just praising, and small number would have just blessing. Wouldn't you think so? If they came out just by accidental omission?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the actual manuscript evidence on this. Praising and blessing God is found in over 2,000 Greek manuscripts of Luke. Praising God, the one they say is the original, is found in 5 Greek manuscripts. Blessing God by itself is found in 1 Greek manuscript. So you can easily see how, praising and blessing God is in the manuscripts. That's the original. That's what's being copied by scribe after scribe after scribe. All these scribes all working, all copying. One of them misses accident the word blessing, so very few. It gets into very few copies. Guy who misses praising gets into very few copies, and that's exactly what we find. So we actually shouldn't call praising and blessing God a conflate reading, which means that 2 differings are stuck together. We should call praising God, the one that the critical text, the mainstream textual criticism goes with, we should call that a truncated reading, a reading that came about by an accidental omission. So we have conflated readings, so-called conflated readings, they actually support the Byzantine against the Alexandrian. And Westcott and Hort didn't find a lot of conflate readings anyway in the Byzantine, so-called conflate readings. But all of them are better explained as accidental omissions in a small minority of manuscripts. So really, they had no good basis whatsoever to get rid of the Byzantine text, but that's what they wanted to do. And so the argument that conflate readings in the Byzantine manuscripts show that the entire text type is indeed secondary and corrupt, which it's a scam, gave the liberal scholars what they wanted, an excuse to throw out the vast majority of New Testament manuscripts, which were generally good, in favor of a handful of corrupt, error-ridden ones. And so the Westcott-Hort theory was accepted as scholarly orthodoxy and continues to be to this day by our evangelical scholars. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Remember, this is all rationalists pulling ideas off the top of their head, not bothering to look at actual evidence. What happens when scribes actually started to look at evidence? You remember the linchpin of that approach of mainstream textual criticism is that scribes took it upon themselves to change the text, change Holy Writ. Griesbach actually said scribes were much more prone to add than to omit. Now, he pulled that idea off the top of his head. During the 20th century, well over a century after Griesbach's canons became scholarly orthodoxy for textual criticism, some scholars finally got around to studying actual scribal habits by examining the manuscripts themselves to see what scribes had done in real life, as opposed to what Griesbach proclaimed that they did. And some of these studies include C.C. Torelli, Omissions, Additions, and Conflations in the Chester Beatty Papyri, published in the Journal of Theological Studies in 1938. Ernest Cadman Caldwell, Scribal Habits in Early Papyri, a study in the corruption of the text, that was included in the Bible in Modern Scholarship, papers read at the 100th meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature, 1965. P.M. Head, The Habits of New Testament Copyists, Singular Readings in the Early Fragmentary Papyri of John, published in Biblica in 2004. And this massive book by James Royce, Scribal Habits in Early Greek New Testament Papyri, over 1,000 pages long. And what all of these studies found is that Griesbach's rules were wrong. In fact, they were backwards. They found that scribes did not generally take it upon themselves to alter the text. Intentional changes are rare. By far the most common mistake is accidental omission, which is a random error. Now understand the significance of it. It means that the text critical theory upon which our evangelical scholars are basing their textual decisions and creating the Greek text from which your NASB, NIV, and so on are translated, that theory is wrong at its very core.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part, same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.